So, you've GM'd the Abomination Vaults before, and now you've just got the book sat on your shelf collecting dust. You could get a fresh group of adventurers and rerun it, but just as adventures tend to be a one-time experience for players, a GM can feel equally weird about running the same adventure multiple times. It can get bland or boring running the same villains and plot points, even if the new group tackles it differently. Well, here at Vinian, we like to get our money's worth out of our TTRPG purchases, and that includes adventures. Yeah, we're going to run it as written the first time, but then what? We could lift some monsters out, sure, but they're all on Archives of Nethys anyway. We could pull some of the maps out, but then we're having to create an entirely new story, and we could have just used any old map. No. What we're going to do is add a totally new spin on the Abomination Vaults to allow you to run the adventure again while keeping it a fresh and exciting experience to GM. Hello, I'm Skull, and in this video I'm going to be providing you with 5 alternate approaches to running the Abomination Vaults adventure path. Spoilers are to be expected, so please be warned. I will be talking about characters and plot lines indiscriminately. Number 1. The Astral Lens. With the upcoming release of Starfinder 2E and the supposed compatibility of the two systems, your party are Starfinders, sent on a mission to retrieve the powerful Astral Lens from the base of the Gauntlet. Unlike the other 4 lenses, this one crashed down from space and became the inspiration for the other's creation. The entire reason the Gauntlet was built here was because it was the site where the Astral Lens crashed deep into the Earth. Rather than Atari acting as your home base, your party operate out of a large, village-sized starship, beaming in and out as needed. Due to the secretive nature of the mission and the fact that Galarian is not aware of the wider galaxy at this time, your party must be absolutely undetected throughout the mission by the people of Atari. This could add a fun element of stealth, and you could even add some new encounters where the townsfolk come to investigate the Gauntlet, and your party must protect them while also staying unseen and unnoticed. The actual dungeon can be ran as is, but with the gameplay feeling a bit more like a secret SWAT mission than a standard dungeon crawl. I'd even make the first mission to place scanners across the first floor in order to get a full blueprint scan of the whole Gauntlet, allowing them to plan their route ahead of time, with complications causing them to change those plans, of course. The reason I call this video a not so lazy guide is because all of these ideas will require significant work on the GM's behalf, and for this one, you're looking at building a new home base, reworking the loot system. Perhaps the original loot they find is able to be traded in for some sort of currency that lets them buy what they need. You'll also be coming up with new encounters based on the sci-fi nature of the story. The strength of this story rework is that it will provide an entirely new experience, so much so that you could even run it for players who have completed Abomination Vaults before. The challenges would obviously arise based on the tight corridors of the Gauntlet, but in my opinion, that's something for your heroes to work around. The story, just by nature of it being more analytical and siege-like in its approach, would feel really rewarding to build around, taking class options and items that work around the dungeon. But perhaps you want to stick with fantasy. Number 2, the 3-faction war. If you want something shorter rather than a full campaign, and you already own the Abomination Vaults, you could pull the first 3 floors out and focus your story on the battling factions. Have your party decide whether they want to side with the Mudflicker Maggots, the Ghost Queen Morlocks, or the Cult of the Canker. Then run a story about the war between these 3 factions. Expand their scope to feel much more entrenched. The Midflits have entire settlements of vine and mud huts across the Gauntlet ruins. The Morlocks have pushed into the northern portion of the servants' quarters and prepared siege defences at each staircase. The ghouls regularly kidnap people from Atari and infect them with ghoul fever to supplement their numbers. Since each faction has a notable leader, you could run a political game with negotiations and backstabbing. Your party can plan and enact raids on the other locations. You could have a map of territories that shifts as the story goes on. Once again, Atari will be on the back burner and not particularly relevant, so you'll need to add vendors to whichever faction they choose to ally with. This adventure would play much like a war game, so some players might really enjoy, but others might miss the heroics of true dungeon crawling. So just make sure everyone's on board with this idea. It would also be best ran as an evil campaign, of course. You'd also need to make an effort to upscale the factions, so your party can't simply slaughter their way through the entire faction. Hence why you'd want to bolster each faction into a full mini-society. If that's not catching your fancy, perhaps we need to raise the stakes. Number 3. Once, twice, 3 times an Earthfall. In this rework, you run the adventure as written until your party have cleared the first 2, perhaps 3 floors of the Gauntlet. Then, disaster strikes. An apocalyptic event of your choosing forces the surface world to retreat underground, much as the Earthfall did. With nowhere to go, the whole of Atari must pack into the Gauntlet. However, your heroes aren't even close to being done with clearing the place out. As resources dwindle and space is scarce, the pressure is on for your party to clear the Gauntlet of threats and help the town move deeper into the Earth, all while protecting them from monster attacks, curious undead, undiscovered traps, and fiendish influence. Each time your party returns from the dungeon crawl below, something should have happened to those stuck on the higher floors. Perhaps a monster they missed attacked and is now barricaded in an important corridor, splitting the two groups of survivors. Perhaps somebody fell prey to a Revian's whisperings and a devil cult has popped up across the population. Perhaps somebody triggered a missed trap and important supplies have been ruined. On your end, alongside their usual loot, your party will need to start finding resources like food, water, and most importantly, safe spaces for the town to move into. For those that like resource management and the influence system, this would be a great rework to add some of those spreadsheet type gameplays and a lot of random encounter tables. But maybe you want something more traditional. Number 4, the Rose Guard. In this rework, rewrite history as your party is the Rose Guard. You don't need to force your players to be the specific characters of the Rose Guard, but they can take on the name and the role of that adventuring party 500 years ago. Rather than running the ruined and desolate dungeon that you're used to, run the Gauntlet as it was during its peak. Belcora is very much alive. The floors are filled with her servants, eager to please, and no longer warring with each other. Belcora, no longer limited to the bottom floors, could act as a roaming boss to be avoided until the party is ready. Atari would be no more than a simple camp. A clever party might even be able to negotiate with Belcora, gaining access to the dungeon that way. Of all the reworks, this one would require the most work, as the maps, enemies, encounters would all need to be fully reworked to suit a fully functioning Gauntlet experience. And lastly, a higher level option. Number 5, Nimbloth Risen. Your heroes were too late. Before anybody ever bothered to investigate the glow, Belcora restored the Gauntlet and fired it. But something went wrong. The magical connection to the old gods was much closer than she realized, and as she fired the beam, it teared open a rift straight to Nimbloth's realm. Now your level 11 party must go in, fight their way through floor after floor of terrifying aberrations, and try to close the rift. In a fun shift, Belcora could be cowering at the top floor with what's left of her loyal servants, and act as the first boss instead of the final boss. Atari has built defenses to keep out the sieging monsters, and the countryside is increasingly dangerous. For this rework, you'd need to rebuild the encounters and factions on each floor to scale from 11 to 20. As a site of evil, Atari has been taken over by Absalom officials and is capable of providing much higher tiers of shopping. Loot in the dungeon would also need to be scaled. The lenses, rather than allowing Nimbloth's access, could be used to close the rift, though they're being held by much more dangerous or evil creatures now. And there you have it. 5 ways you could recycle the Abomination Vaults into a fresh yet familiar campaign. These would require significant work, but in theory, still technically less work than a fully homebrewed campaign. If you want to see my own playthrough of the Abomination Vaults, you can watch the campaign diaries on this channel. The quality of them is constantly improving, so if you can endure those rough first few episodes, they do get a lot better. And I'm sure that you'll enjoy them. If you liked this video, then please like and subscribe if you aren't. There's loads more content on this channel for you to look at. We do have a Discord and a Blue Sky, links in the description. That is all for today. Bye-bye.